On today's Exploring History podcast, we'll look at a speech from 1852 that challenged America and helped it become a better country.
Welcome to Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History.
Let me recommend a book to you, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. Published in 1845, the book is a searing account of one man's enslavement and ultimate escape. It's a short book, and it's well worth your time. Let me also recommend taking a look at Frederick Douglass himself and a speech he gave a few years later. Douglass was born in slavery in Maryland around 1818. Enslaved persons, unfortunately, did not have their births recorded. As a child, Frederick showed intelligence and a keen perception of the world around him. It was illegal for anyone to teach an enslaved person how to read. Frederick learned that this was true and quickly realized that learning to read was exactly what he wanted to do. If slave owners wanted to keep their enslaved persons illiterate, Frederick knew that being able to read would be a source of great power. His book tells how he utilized his friendships with white children to begin learning to read, and how his master's wife secretly taught him more. Douglass was skilled in shipbuilding and was sometimes hired out to other masters to work for them. When he was around 20 years old, Douglass decided that he was not going to take enslavement any longer, so he escaped to freedom. He became an eloquent advocate for abolition and began making speeches in northern states. Some people were skeptical of Douglass's story. They doubted that a former enslaved person could be such an effective speaker. To support his story, Douglass wrote a relatively short biography called Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, published in 1845 when he was only about 27 years old. It became an immediate sensation, and his profits from the book enabled him to purchase his freedom from his former owner. Douglass wanted to be able to move about freely and not fear being recaptured. Douglass continued to be a sought-after speaker. In 1852, he was invited to give a speech at the Independence Day celebration of a women's abolitionist group in Rochester, New York. July 4th fell on a Sunday that year, and the event took place on July 5th. To provide some context for the speech, we need to note that the abolitionist movement was growing at the time. Southern defense of slavery was also growing more harsh. Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin had been published in serial form starting the previous year and was published in book form in 1852. The speech also came in the wake of the Compromise of 1850, which included the Fugitive Slave Law. This law required all Americans, North or South, to assist in the capture of a runaway slave. Many Northerners were incensed at the law and refused to obey it. 1852 marked 76 years since the adoption of the Declaration of Independence and the United States' separation from Great Britain. July 4th had become an enshrined celebration of the country's freedom, just as John Adams had predicted that it should. The stirring words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," filled American hearts with pride. Yet, a major flaw in the story of American liberty was the practice of slavery. It was to this flaw that Douglass spoke on that July day in 1852 in Rochester. Douglass declared, quote, "The distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude." Unquote. He continued, quote, "This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance, and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life." Unquote. He recalled the oppression with which Britain ruled its American colonies and the resolution of Congress to throw off that oppression. "Citizens," Douglass went on to say, quote, "your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring-bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. The principles contained in the Declaration are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. They were great men, too, great enough to give fame to a great age. It does not often happen to a nation to raise at one time such a number of truly great men. The point from which I am compelled to view them is not certainly the most favorable, and yet I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory." Unquote. But Douglass did not want to focus on the past. His purpose was to address the present, and in that present, the blessings of liberty celebrated on the 4th were not shared by millions of people living in America at the time. He went on, quote, "I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery." Unquote. There was no question, Douglass said, that enslaved persons were human beings. This was acknowledged in law and practice. And yet enslaved persons did not enjoy the liberty and the rights about which Americans celebrated and were rightfully proud. The high point of his speech came with this question, quote, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless." Unquote. Douglass went on to lament the inhuman domestic slave trade, which was nothing less than human trafficking. He decried the fugitive slave law, which he said made slavery a national reality. Then, in what must have been a surprising section, Douglass stated his belief that the Constitution was not a document that supported slavery. He said, quote, "The Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Read its preamble, consider its purposes. Is slavery among them? Would it not be somewhat singular that if the Constitution were intended to be, by its framers and adopters, a slave-holding instrument, why neither slavery, slaveholding, nor slave can anywhere be found in it? Take the Constitution according to its plain reading, and I defy the presentation of a single pro-slavery clause in it. On the other hand, it will be found to contain principles and purposes entirely hostile to the existence of slavery." Unquote. Of course, I can't know what thoughts lay behind Douglass's statements about the Constitution. The United States practiced slavery for decades under the Constitution, and there were several clauses and phrases that addressed the reality of slavery while avoiding the use of the term. But I believe he was saying that there was nothing in the Constitution that treated slavery as a permanent part of our country. The way that the Constitution treated slavery was the result of compromises made at the Constitutional Convention. Even at that early date in our nation's history, there were sharp disagreements about slavery. Douglass looked to the deeper principles upon which our country was founded, imperfectly, we must admit, but principles that would guide the country to a better day and a more complete application of those principles. Elsewhere, Douglass said that the fact that the Constitution outlawed the slave trade after 1808 showed that the founders meant good, that they tended toward the ending of slavery and not its perpetuation. James Madison once said that the word slave was struck from the Constitution because the delegates to the convention would not consent to the idea of humans as property being admitted into the Constitution. Douglass closed his speech on an optimistic note. He believed the day was coming when slavery would be ended. Quote, "Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope." Unquote. Frederick Douglass believed that a nation committed to the principles of the Declaration of Independence could not in good conscience continue to deny those rights to millions of persons living in this country. Even more, those who believed in the God of love and the Creator of all could not deny freedom to their fellow men, their fellow believers. In his narrative, Douglass presents a powerful statement of his personal faith in God. Although he was treated shamefully, he continued to hold that faith. After the Civil War, Douglass was an advocate for civil rights and racial equality until his death in 1895. I have discussed this speech not to drag up the unpleasant past or to say that America is a racist nation today. I don't believe it is. The speech challenged America to confront itself, to help Americans see that the practice of slavery denied their stated commitment to freedom and equality. In 1852, the tide was indeed turning toward ending slavery. Equality for black people would take longer to bring about. Another eloquent leader, Martin Luther King Jr., was one of those who would lead that effort, and equality would come about. Frederick Douglass looked past the country's status at the time to what it could become. He believed in the rightness of his cause, and, in Lincoln's phrase, in the better angels of our nature. Douglass didn't want to overthrow the system. Instead, he wanted to use the system to overthrow the evil of slavery. Douglass had the courage to speak up on a subject he believed in. He was crystal clear in what he wanted to say. Those are principles we can put into practice today. Douglass was a learner. He believed passionately in the power of education because he knew what it had meant to him. You can set this as a goal for your children and yourselves. Learn and keep learning the truth. Don't be afraid to learn more. Don't be comfortable with where you are. You owe it to yourself and to others to keep growing in knowledge and understanding. Descendants of Frederick Douglass are alive today. They are American citizens, and they are carrying on the cause of justice and equality. It's a different America now than it was in Douglass's day. Not perfect, but much further down the road, thanks in no small measure to the heart and faith of Frederick Douglass. I'm Ray Notgrass. Thanks for exploring history with me today, and enjoy the 4th as a day that now all Americans can celebrate.
This has been Exploring History with Ray Notgrass, a production of Notgrass History. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast app, and please leave a rating and review so that we can reach more people with our episodes. If you want to learn about new homeschool resources and opportunities from Notgrass History, you can sign up for our email newsletter at exploringhistorypodcast.com. This program was produced by me, Titus Anderson. Thanks for listening.